was stillborn. And the doctor, Dr. Kipri, said, because he'd been through a lot of these things, he said, you throw him in the garbage can. And my father said, isn't there anything I can do? And so the doctor said to him, breathe into his mouth. And so my father essentially performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And all of a sudden, in, 2 or 3 minutes, he started crying. And from that point on, every time we went to the doctor, his nickname was Garbage Can. He always called him Garbage Can because he was saved from the garbage can by my father. Talk about miracles. I mean, there's another one. So we were at the Dorothy Street house. We were not supposed to go to the basement, but of course we went to the basement. And somehow the gas was turned on. Because it was on as long as it was, we were both very dizzy and sleepy. My mother had sent a waitress over, and she went back and she said, I saw the boys, and the boys were very dizzy. And so my mother came over right away, and see, the restaurant was about a long block from the house. She bailed us out. I mean, if we'd stayed longer, it might have been kind of disastrous. But 2 or 3 times, when Tom was sleeping in my father's arms, he would wake up, and he knew where the restaurant was, and he would walk and cross Mount Elliott, which was very crowded, a very busy street. And he'd say, Ma Isa, Ma, I'm here. So they had to come up with some plan to make sure that he didn't do it again. He was not well behaved like I was. He was a brat. We were supposed to go to a Youth for Christ meeting. And so I had my bike, my brand new bike, and I put him on the handlebars, and off we went. I was going down the street, and just past the alley, there was a driveway, and I went down that driveway, and the car hit us, because the car didn't see us coming down the driveway. And he got knocked off the bike, and he hit his head on the cement. And so he was bleeding. Lying down, he was unconscious. And so I went back to the restaurant, and I said, bring some napkins. Tommy fell and he's bleeding a little bit. That's what I said. And then I got ripped into by my father. Yeah. And then when he saw Tom on the ground, he sobered up very quickly, and he stopped his, belly aching with me. And they had just already called the ambulance, and the ambulance came and rushed him to the hospital. We didn't know if he's going to live the night because he was really he had a fractured skull. He had called all the churches and asked for prayer and everything else. And so in the morning, Tom got up, and my dad was in the room with him, and he said, Thelo Nero, I want water. And my dad almost had a heart attack because he spoke. And then nobody expected him. So he didn't lose his speaking, his voice. And he's never stopped since. Actually, my fault, I guess you would say. And, I've never told this to anybody, but I was trying to get him killed. I hated him. And you can juice that up any way you want. Okay. Well, anyway, that was it. That was the accident. And he was out of school for 6 months. And, everybody would come to visit, and they'd bring a box of candy. He had like 45 boxes of candy. And then I came to see him at one point, and he looked at my scars and goes, wow. I had nothing compared to him. But I had some bruises and, bruises on my arm. And so anyway, it took him a long time to recover. But after he recovered, he became a little different in terms of his schooling and everything else. He gained a little sharpness by then.
N Pappas was a mystery to me for quite a few years, because every time I was asking my brother George, what is N Pappas? One time he was saying he was in Italy, the other in Turkey, the other in Greece, the other in the Middle East, and I could not figure out what that man was doing. And the only conclusion I could make with that was that those people were really working for the agency in the United States as a spies.
Walked into Dr. Nicholson's office and I said, Dean Nicholson, I am very interested in debate. He said, oh, I didn't see that on your resume. I said, well, I have been a debater and I served for 3 years as the assistant debate coach at Wayne State University. And by the way, his name was George Ziegelmuller, and he is recognized throughout the debate circuit as a very, very effective coach. And he said, well, we don't have funds for that. I proceeded to raise the funds through Helen Aker. Helen Aker was the wife and the widow of Judge Aker. She contributed $1,000.
Tom really had a national audience in mind. He gave us the feeling that, yes, we could go to Harvard and compete in the Harvard tournament. Yes, we could go to Columbia and compete in the Columbia tournament. But, we could even go to DePauw and compete in the DePauw tournament. It didn't matter if it was fairly local or if it was really a national competition. We felt that we could give as good as we could as we got.
Joe and Webster and Oldham and I walked out to the car. It was not obvious that we were with him or he was with us, and so as he was paying the check, as he told us later, a guy at the counter turned to the fellow next to him and referred to us, motioned towards us, and we went out the door and said, "Charlie, there goes the scum of the earth." That became sort of a legend among debaters. Every time any of us were criticized or any of us lost our temper, someone would say, "Stop being the scum of the earth."
Tom would always look for the cheapest way to get anywhere. So he would scan the Indianapolis papers to find people who wanted to move their cars from Indianapolis to Boston. And then we would volunteer to drive their car from Indianapolis to Boston, and that's how we would go to the Harvard debate tournament. So it was a little bit on the cheap. And, we had occasional cars with bald tires, and we would have to stop and change the flats.
Again, I was 17, 18 years old, just a hayseed from Kansas. And we would sing together such hymns as "The Church's One Foundation is Harvard's Harvey Cox." He speaks of new creations within the city blocks. He frightens D.S. Warner. He makes the fundies cry. And for that very reason, he's just our kind of guy.
I'm Falcon. At least that's the name that was given to me by my recruiter and my handler. I came quite innocently to Anderson College in 1965 wanting to study English and perhaps debate. And then I ran into Dr. Thomas Pappas. Every successful operative for the agency over the years has used a cover. And so Dr. Pappas very cleverly used the job of college professor, and he appropriated an additional title for himself as the Director of International Travel and Studies. So that made it possible for him to move freely about the country and about the world as an operative.
It was about 1968. Campus was alive with activism, as you might imagine. And we hosted a fellow named Dick Gregory. At that time, a well-known comedian, but a comedian with a social justice edge in his routine. As he walked down the hall of, I think it was Hartung Hall, he noticed a really curious advertisement on one of the bulletin boards, recruiting members to the CIA. When he got to the lecture hall and he began his presentation, he noted with great alarm that a fine Christian college would be recruiting for this agency that was responsible for so much turmoil, so much heartache around the world. He fulminated against it for many minutes until finally someone in the audience timidly pointed out that on this campus, CIA stood for Christianity in Action. Everybody laughed, including Mr. Gregory, and it was a great time. Little did people in the audience and Mr. Gregory know, however, that in truth, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, did have a presence on Anderson College campus in the person of none other than the esteemed professor, Dr. Thomas N. Pappas.
There was a group led by Vern Smith, a gentleman who was one of my debaters. He had put together a group to go to Europe. And he had advertised this as a program that was available for academic credit.
The piece to fall in place was I wanted to make sure that we could offer college credit for this trip. So I went to see then Dean Nicholson and said, what do we have to do this? And he said, you have to have a faculty member to go along who can be kind of the instructor, the leader of the group, the person who will be able to give a grade. And Dr. Nicholson said, let me think about it for a few days and then come back and see me. We'll see what we can do. And I left the Nicholson's office and ran right up to the fourth floor office of Tom Pappas. And I knocked on the door and he said, come in. And I went in and I said, Dr. Pappas, we're organizing this tour to Europe. I need to have a faculty member.
And so Vern comes to me and he says, would you be interested and available? This would have been for the summer of 1964.
And I'll never forget, he said, well, let me talk to Gloria and I'll let you know tomorrow. And I remember sitting there across his desk and thinking, you have to talk to somebody? What? You can't just say yes? That he actually would check with Gloria about going to Europe in the summer. And it was great. And that was the first of 17 consecutive years.
We went on a boat that was called Grotebeer. It's a Dutch liner. I use the term loosely when I say liner. It was kind of a tugboat, but it was an old boat. But they felt that they could get a couple more sailings out of it, and we got on the boat, and we took 9 days to get to the old country, as we called it, and Amsterdam. And there was fighting on board because the crew was comprised largely of Greeks, but the owners were largely Dutch. And so I became the intermediary between the Greeks and the Dutch, because they would say to me in Greek, "This is what's wrong," and I would translate that to the Dutch, who knew English, and that was how we got to Europe.
I think 20 of us or so that went. I was to be married on September the 8th, 1968, almost immediately after our return in late August. I think we were supposed to get back like September 1st or something like that, and our guide actually was sort of a nice, naive woman in her 50s, I would say. She may have been truly naive, or she may just have been spouting the party line.
I was not going to allow this lady to give the impression that we were a static culture. We were actually, at that time, we were a very dynamic culture.
And then one day we went to the museum and you had a big lecture there.
Your father had sort of planted some questions, I think mostly for me to ask, but he also planted them for other people to ask.
She was lying to my students, and one thing about a historian, doesn't like lies.
It was at a time when the kind of two most noted cultural political prisoners were Sinyavsky and Daniel. I remember your father kind of whispering to me, "Ask her about Sinyavsky and Daniel." So I piped up to our guide, well, so what is this about Sinyavsky and Daniel? Why are they in prison?
And I would correct the guide in English, of course. And finally, and it was at that time that a man comes to me and he says, "Are you Dr. Pappas?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "I need to talk to you. There's a group from the youth organization here in the Soviet Union that want to interview you."
Joe Smith was standing up and he says, I have a special gift to give Dr. Pappas when he gets back. And he lifts up this statue, and it's the head of Lenin. Meanwhile, he's doing that, and in you walk,
White.
And you're white. What's happening? How did the interview go?
Well, that was just a ploy, because he took me into another room, and then he said, "I want you to know that your visa's been revoked and you're being expelled from the Soviet Union."
We need to leave within 18 hours.
They did not give your mother and him much time at all before they left. And I do remember that as this all kind of came to a head, and the KGB people or whoever they were showed up, there were accusations about the kinds of questions that were asked, the troublemaking, and I believe there was an actual accusation of saying slanderous things about the tractors of the Soviet Union. That would be terrible, to say something slanderous about the tractors of the Soviet Union. So it was clearly all sort of trumped up charges. They separated your father and, questioned him directly. I remember being kind of nearby when the State Department people were there and the Russians were questioning and the State Department people were kind of interpreting and responding, to some extent defending your father. But basically they wound up with, well, the best thing is, I mean, the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to have to leave.
At that point that I realized that it was all out of my hands now. It was in the hands of the Soviet Union. And so they arranged for us to fly out on a trip on a plane that was leaving early in the morning from the airport in Moscow directly to the airport in East Berlin.
But we didn't know. It was at that point that the trip was cut off. We stayed in Moscow maybe a day or 2 days longer. We were pretty much, prisoners might be too strong a word, but not too strong a word, in our hotel. We really couldn't go anywhere. And then, they took us to buses, took us to the airport, and flew us to East Berlin.
When we saw a checkpoint, Charlie, we saw an American, and I said, "This is it. We're here. We're free."
We got off the plane. I kissed the ground. I was so happy.
Yeah.
We really had very little information about where we were going. And then when we got to West Berlin, we were very, very relieved. I think I actually did kiss the ground. I really do believe I did, because it was so wonderful to be back in freedom. And this was 1968. I think one of the reasons we were kicked out was because it was the year of the Prague Spring. And Alexander Dubček, but it was called the Prague Spring, and it was socialism with a human face. That's what they called it. And Russians, while we were in the Soviet Union, the Russians rolled their tanks into Prague, deposed Dubček. They did not murder him, but they deposed him and reinstalled a Soviet sympathizing regime.
Dr. Reardon, who was the president of Anderson University, heard on the news that a group from Anderson College was expelled from the Soviet Union, not mentioning the fact that the professor who was leading the group was expelled. And so he called my father, and he wanted to know whether my father knew what had happened to us. And, "Reverend John, have you heard what happened to Tom?" And my father hesitantly said, "No, what happened to my son?" And he said, "He's been expelled from the Soviet Union." And my father said, "I told him to keep his big mouth shut."
Wined and dined to the nth degree, and how could you refuse not coming to Warner?
Tom Pappas is, with the exception of my wife, the person most responsible for where I am today. It was Tom who, in a personal conversation, said to me, "You ought to think about, again, going to grad school." I hadn't taken the graduate record exam yet. And he said, "Well, you take care of all of that. You get the GRE scheduled. You get that under your belt. And I'll make some inquiries." Not only did I start graduate school, but as I met with my graduate school advisor at that time, I had 2 first-year courses forgiven, waived, eliminated from my curriculum because of the courses that I took from Tom. He said, "Well, we have this fellow retiring, and I think you might make a good fit at Warner Pacific." So as we talked in Indianapolis at the airport, I became more and more excited and more interested in this position as Tom described the kind of institution Warner Pacific was trying to become. So I took that job, thinking it would be for 2 or 3 years. That was in 1977. I'm here in all aspects because of Tom Pappas. Thanks, Tom.
His name was Sylvia Harthy, and he was ambassador from Saudi Arabia to the United States. So he called me and he said, Dr. Pappas, we have about 30 students from Saudi Arabia who need a college, need a university. Are you willing to take them? And so I said, certainly we'll take them.
온갖 내 사스며 보고 듣고 맛보므로 한량 없는 죄를 지어 잘못된 길 갈팡질 방생사고 임매면서 나와난 것 침착하고 그런 길만 찾아 다녀 여러 생애지현 업장 크고 작은 많은 물산보 진내 원력이라 일심참매하옵나니 바라옵건대 부처님이 끄시고 보살님 내 살피옵소 고통받아 해연하수 열반은 더 가사이다. 이 세상의 명과 복을 길이길이 창생하고 없는 세상 불법지에 무럭무럭 자라나서 날쯤마다 중국고 밝은 서성만 나오며 바른 신심 굳게 세고 하이로서 출가하여
He was, or still is, a member of the CIA.
Well, if he was, he is.
And so when a student asks a question, I have to respond in 5 hours, and that's, oh, okay, that's good. Then the next 3 days, it's 2:30 in the morning. I have to go to the bathroom. I see the light on. I come back down to the kitchen trying to be a good host. Your dad's on the computer at 2:30 in the morning. Like, who's answering a question at 2:30 in the morning? Except for maybe the launch codes. That maybe.
Yeah.
Are the subs moving around? So that's the story. That's the where I want to tell.
I have known a number of people that ultimately we discovered were CIA operatives. And then there's always this kind of shadowy in between of people who traveled to some of these countries that were well-known people or known to the State Department, known to the CIA, known to the military intelligence organizations. And they were frequently debriefed after coming back. I don't know for sure that your father was debriefed. I know he had excellent connections at the State Department.
Did we really drive straight through? Is it just that we all fell asleep and he might have met a clandestine CIA operative and they exchanged information while we were snoring?
I talked with Tom for 2 hours and I still don't know what the hell he does.
Coming into Detroit for an hour. Now maybe it was just between clandestine operative adventures.
Is the fact that you guys got the first dog in the family. And I remember being at the Coventry house and looking out and seeing my very tall uncle walking little teeny tiny fluffy infamous drive to Florida in 24 hours. And you and Carol, I think, and your parents were in the front car, and I was in the back car with my parents and Doreen. And I remember your dad weaving. And I remember every time he did, my dad mumbling under his breath, "Evelyn, your brother's going to get us all killed." And then I remember your dad stopping at a million Waffle Houses to get rejuvenated. And my mother would never say one word against him. Every single time he called our home, my mother would light up like a Christmas tree. And just, even if she was having a regular, ordinary day, she would hear, "My brother!" And then she'd be all happy, smiling. And we liked when he called because then she got in a great mood afterward. But it was wonderful, that relationship that she had with him, that he could just brighten her day no matter what.
I want to say, Tom, that Thomas Nicholas Pappas, that you are not only still a good friend, but you are a major influence on my life. You helped guide me into an academic career, which I think I'm grateful for your doing. Although in retrospect, I can't imagine what else I might possibly have done that would have suited my own temperament and talents, such as they are. And I remember you fondly and congratulate you on your advanced age and hope that you have a long and happy life still to come.
We ran into Uncle Tom in Florida one time, and he said he had some business down there, and he had a little condo down there, and I was like, what? And he offered that we were able to stay with him for a couple of days because we were going to Disney World with our kids. But he says, just stay right here, you know? It's like, wow, this was like a miracle. But, you know, he had multitude computers, laptops there, I wanted to know. So what kind of business, I'm not sure there.
Hi, Uncle Tom. Sorry I can't be there to celebrate with you on your 80th birthday. But thank you very much for all the memories of our travels together. And that's one special day in Rome, which I know you know, and I won't forget. And I wish you lots of more joyous days with your family and your friends. Love you, Tom. Bye-bye.
Dr. Thomas N. Pappas called Scharnhorst, quote, "perhaps among the top 3 or 4 debaters we have ever had in campus history." And my response to your dad was, who the hell are the other 2 or 3?
You know, Anderson was laid out so that the college sat between 3rd and 5th Streets. The people who were poor had houses on 3rd Street. I had a house on 3rd Street. And the higher you went in numerical numbers, the more important the house. President Reardon lived on 7th Street. You lived near 10th Street. So the talk around our house was, how can Pappas afford that house? He must have a secret income someplace. Now we know it was the CIA that gave him a second source of income.
I recently hacked into CIAancestry.com to dig into and find some information about Thomas Nicholas Pappas. And the further I dug, the more I became blocked and couldn't find any more information. So therefore, I truly, firmly believe that Thomas Nicholas Pappas is a clandestine service agent for the CIA.
Happy birthday, Uncle Tommy. I say Uncle Tommy because you're my Uncle Tommy. And I just want you to have a wonderful birthday. Sorry we can't be there. And I'm so glad. 80. Woo! Super cool. Love you.
Happy birthday, Uncle Tommy. We love you.
Happy birthday to Tommy.
Happy birthday, Uncle Tommy. We love you.
Happy birthday, Tom. Hello, Dan.
Happy birthday to Tom, and tell him the fum. But before we go, we got to do some special obvious.
Okay.
What
Yeah.
is that last one?
I don't know.
Let's break some eggs.
Break some eggs. Okay.
Tom, I wish you the best many more years na ektostisis.
He was very supportive, very encouraging. To tell you the truth, when I thought about being a college professor, particularly when it came to lecturing and the kind of engagement that Tom had with a large classroom of students, 150 students, I really wanted to be like Tom Pappas. Tom, congratulations on reaching this milestone. I feel like I ought to say ZTAlos, but that's as far as my Greek goes. So congratulations on your birthday. Many of your happy returns of the day, and my wish for many, many more. Thanks a lot.
And look at how we turned out. I mean, Joe Smith, a high-dollar lawyer. Dale Webster became a district attorney. Dave Oldham became a labor leader and a career educator, and me. You know, we weren't the scum of the earth. And I would like to think that the fellow who referred to us as that is dead by now.
He was always going somewhere. We went places, but we went in a travel trailer. You guys traveled in style.
So he may well have been a source of some useful information. I wouldn't be surprised at all. And of course, the fact that once the Soviet Union kind of cooled off, he started going to China. I mean, you know, res ipsa loquitur, we say in the legal profession. The thing just speaks for itself. So, you know, I can't do more than that kind of speculation for you.
Yeah, he worked for the CIA. All more he denied it, the more obvious that he was.
I can't answer that without my lawyer. The narrative that has the business of being kicked out of the Soviet Union is probably the most significant. I am not a spy now. I have never been a spy.
Start your engines.
Well, I was walking down the Kudam in the city of Berlin. A man in a Mercedes stops and says, "Jump in." As we rode down the street, he said,
"Have you ever seen such rain?"
I said, "Listen, listen, rain, listen. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Breathe that mountain air, man. Cross that desert bare, man. Travel, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
Have you been to Berlin?
I've been Berlin, Dresden, Leipzig, Dusseldorf, Dortmund, Stuttgart, Saarbrücken, Mulhouse, Hartheim, Turkheim, Mannheim, Hard Times, Hamburg, Freiburg, Offenburg, Nuremberg, Frankfurt, Erfurt, Schweinfurt, Wuppertal, Solingen, Göppingen, Tübingen, Tübingen. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere,
He's been everywhere.
Man. Breathe that mountain air, man. Cross that desert there, man. Travel, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
Have you been to Cottbus?
Been to Cottbus, Chemnitz, Weimar, Potsdam, Wolfsburg, Braunschweig, Würzburg, Heidelberg, Ingolstadt, Heilbronn, München, Augsburg, Einbeck, Oldenburg, Marienburg, Brandenburg, Homburg, Marburg, Osnabrück, Bielefeld, Neustadt, Darmstadt, Bottrop, Klaffenburg. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere,
He's been everywhere.
Man. Breathe that mountain air, man. Cross that desert there, man. Travel, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
Have you been to Baden-Baden?
I've been to Baden, 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 Baden,